So very good afternoon and very warm welcome everyone to our 22nd Research Futures webinar. Many thanks to all colleagues and friends who have joined from around the world. I see people from India, Bangladesh, China, Ecuador, the UK, France, and much more. So I'm really delighted to see many of you, knowing that the situation at the moment is not easy. And we also have a lot of work, so I'm really happy that you've all joined. As you know, I'm Leila Shukrouna. I'm Professor of International Law and Director of the Democratic Citizenship theme. Today, we are delighted to welcome our colleague from Bangalore, Sebastian Devaraj, who is one of these rare individuals who have dedicated their life to others, to their fight for justice and rights, spanning across 4 decades. He has engaged as an activist and unionist with Indian workers, with the Indian social movement, to support workers in a variety of environments. On the ground, at the closest to women and men suffering, hopes and aspiration, he has witnessed life stories of labor, exploitation, casteist, paternalistic and capitalistic oppression, but also success stories of emancipation, education and social change. This is the social change through the empowering engine of collective bargaining that we are going to address today, with a special focus on textile and garment supply chain and its localization in India and around the region of Bangalore particularly. Fashion is now often depicted as polluting and harmful to the environment, as if the consensual and wishy-washy sort of rhetoric of sustainability was more acceptable than the true language of rights. While the fashion industry is certainly polluting, there is more and probably worse to it: the human cost. Who makes your clothes? We all know about these advertisements, these campaigns, and yet, what is the difference? Here in the UK, British modern slavery practices of sweatshops are regularly making the headlines, as if the 19th century textile mill of Charles Dickens had never disappeared. Yes, indeed, it has only delocalized, one delocalization after the other, from the poor to the poorest, from North Africa to China, Bangladesh, and Ethiopia. From the poor to the poorest of the poor, these half-clad, half-starved, half-educated, to quote the famous Indian Supreme Court judgment, Kesavandanda Bharati. And yet again, the situation is much more complex than it looks like. For single women in particular, factory life can also be a respite, a shelter from domestic abuses and domination, a means to educate their children, in a word, the key to independence through assertion of their rights as women workers. The much criticized supply chain, despite its very undemocratic character, can also bring forms of social change and if framed and supported by a human rights-based approach. In the context of the global pandemic and beyond, it is a pleasure and certainly a privilege to welcome Sebastian Devaraj. Working with this team is an enlightening human experience, and I wanted to share this experience with you today at the occasion of this webinar. So Sebastian, without further ado, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Laila. Thank you. I'm quite humbled to be here, as well as elated to be part of such a process. I feel we need to connect, and that's the only way forward. And starting with what I should finish. This is coming together is the most important thing. Thank you. Could I speak a little bit about what Fedina does? Yeah. Okay. I joined Fedina in 2007. But Fedina is an old organization. It started in 1983 as a trust. Probably all of you are aware that India went through a period of emergency where political rights were completely suspended for 2 years. And there was severe repression. All democratic rights were just crushed. A lot of people were jailed. This was between 1975 and 1977. So it's 2 years of a dark period in Indian history. And preceding that was a lot of workers' agitation because there was a lot of unemployment and price rise and privatization and various corruption. Nothing was moving. So yeah, so there was a whole lot of agitation, the railway strike, and the joint action committee strike, trade unions in the organized sector, especially the public sector, had come together, and that was the height in 1974. And then the prime minister, then prime minister, was charged with corruption, and then this suddenly all democratic rights ceased to exist as of 25th June 1975. And yeah, so many of our founding trustees of Fedina were part of this process where they were fighting this authoritarian kind of regime at that time. So Fedina has a history that it started against the suspension of democratic rights and wanting to restore that particular uh, robust thing that existed in India after the independence. Participation of the working class in the independence movement was huge, and that had ensured a lot of labor rights for us. 75, everything was suspended. Nobody had democratic rights, and people who had participated in that had started in 1983 this organization. At that time, the objective was to empower the marginalized. With that in mind, I think at that time, a self-help group and savings was promoted as a huge process where people could be empowered. So Fedina went through that phase as well, believing that if you could enable vulnerable workers or vulnerable communities to save from their meager earnings, form self-help groups, they could improve their living conditions. But about 15 years of that kind of work showed Fedina that it was actually not empowering people, it was counterproductive to empowerment. And in fact, self-help groups gave the false impression or understanding that the problem of poverty was because individuals were not able to save or were not hardworking enough. So after 15 years of this income generation activity and self-help groups, Fedina, which was working, we were working with different sectors: sanitation workers, agricultural workers, women, Dalits, the caste, the lowest outcast community, and the tribals who were being displaced at that time with a lot of vigor. So all these groups across 5 southern states of India, about 29 groups were brought together into a network. And from then on, we thought we should access the rights and entitlements and the government programs, organize people to access all this and for effective implementation of what the government programs were. So slowly the self-help group work reduced, and we started to organize and practice the schemes the government had brought in. But what we realized again, the schemes had no intent of implementation behind that. They were all on paper. And for a long time, we went on advocacy and lobbying for these things, for campaigning, prolonged the campaign, but hardly any result. Around 1998, actually, when all these groups, the network groups used to meet once in 3 months, reflect on their actions, share their experiences, and then through those reflections, quarterly reflections, we realized that all of the community that we were working with were actually, in a sense, workers who were contributing their labor to the society, and a huge amount of contribution. It was estimated that the contribution of the informal sector is almost 60% to the national income. And then we started to look at a different way of organizing them. And between this 98 and 2002, 2003, all our reflections were showing that more and more the economy was getting integrated into the market, and people the community was becoming more wage labor than just on their livelihoods, small livelihoods. So this huge informal sector that we were working with were actually needed to be organized, not just going after schemes, but around the contribution that they were making to the economy. So this was a turning point in Fedina's evolution. Around 2004, we got together and we prioritized our focus. And our first focus was emphasis was on unionization and collective bargaining, and that would mean unionization of the informal sector workers. Since we were also working with tribals and Dalits, there was a question of rights at work and right to work because it was so arbitrary. And then our third priority was defending or accessing right to land for agriculture and housing, because at that point of time there was this huge effort at evicting people from their housing because it was illegal. Slums were being cleared, evicted, and in the rural areas, people were being deprived of their land that they were cultivating because they did not have titles. Tribals were being pushed out of forests. So access to land as a right for agriculture and housing was another main focus. And then the other social discrimination, violence against Dalits was another focus area. Right of women to equality, non-discrimination, and protection against violence. So these are our five major focus areas. And what we started with, that is accessing government programs and our own programs of self-help and income generation, came down the whole priority. And so this is how in 2004, Fedina changed from just an NGO working to help people to organizing labor, recognizing their contribution to the economy. So post that period, we were in different sectors. Some of them were sanitation workers, agricultural workers, traditional sex workers, what they call the Devadasis in the Indian system. And along with this, what we realized was that they could not be organized just as workers without tackling the caste issue and the patriarchy, because that really held them back from even participating. Maybe that I could tell you a little more a little later. But then in 2004, we shifted a lot more focus onto the garment sector, which was mushrooming hugely at the end of that multi-fiber arrangement period. The industry itself was consolidating in Bangalore, and today there are anywhere between 500,000 workers in the city of Bangalore alone, and 80% of them are women. So in 2004, Fedina's one of the major areas of organizing workers was garment sector. The rest were all absolutely informal sector workers where employer-employee relationship was almost non-existent and in the sense invisible. The only sector where we got involved was which had very clear, which was the organized sector, but absolutely non-unionized. This is Fedina's growth. Maybe Laila, should I go on with the garment sector?
Can we maybe take a sort of break here, Sebastian, because I think it was really very helpful that you explain how you have adjusted your strategy as a movement to the political evolution of India, and how you started at the time times which were extremely complicated, out of emergency, and progressively you've adapted, adjusted again your strategy. But a number of our participants are not particularly familiar with the Indian context. So would you mind explaining a number of things which you might think are simple, but this right at work and the right to work, the difference, knowing that a number of your members are Dalit. So what it is to be a Dalit, what it is to be a tribal, and what's the differences between the right at work and the right to work?
Yeah. Many of the groups that we were working with were in the agriculture sector, and economic policies pursued by successive governments were depriving them and agriculture of any returns. So there was a lot of unemployment that was in the rural area. Many of them were moving into the cities, and in the rural areas where they were not reduced to about 4 to 5 months in a year in and where there was water. Perhaps there were 2 crops, 3 crops, 7 to 8 months of work. Otherwise, it was reduced about just 3 to 4 months. And so this absolute poverty, I mean, the whole thing was getting integrated into the market. People were not growing their own food. So being dependent on wage labor, but they needed employment. So this is something that was a movement. In 2004, there was this. 2005, there was this National Rural Employment Guarantee Act that was passed after a lot of struggle to ensure or guarantee a certain amount of income through work, providing work. Before that, there were some programs called Food for Work. So it was more, giving them food and giving them some work so that they just were able to eat and live. That movement got intensified, and there was this demand for ensuring respectful employment and a guaranteed income per family. And in 2005, this was called the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, which ensured 100 days of employment on demand by an agricultural family, and this 100 days was for the family, of every rural family. And so we felt, on the one hand, we felt that it was very difficult to organize agriculture peasants because they had in mind, they thought they were living off their land, they were working on the land, but invariably it was not giving them enough to live. They were not accounting their labor in the kind of half an acre or 1 acre of land. And so their whole life was dependent on the wage, which they were not actually asking for their due. And they were paid, I mean, especially in the rural area, the wage between men and women was 100 to 30. I mean, it was 1/3. In most places, 1/3 of what the men were earning. And it was for the same amount of work and same hour of work, the quality of work, quantity. In fact, sometimes the women did back-breaking work, but only because of their social status and their devaluation, social devaluation, they were paid just about 30% of what the men were paid. So we felt, Fedina felt that this National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, which had come, it came under pressure of struggle, but there was no heart or soul or intent to implement it. So, because the landlord lobby in the rural area was refusing to allow it to be implemented, because allowing it to be implemented would push wages in the other areas. If workers were guaranteed 100 days of work, they would not be available cheap for their work. So it was always scuttled both by the government and by the landlords who were in the panchayat. So this prevented its implementation. So we felt on the one hand they needed the employment, on the other hand they needed to be organized. So we felt this act gave us that kind of handle to bring them together around a particular issue. So we started to organize them. That was the right to work.
Right.
Right at work, it was the first act which provided for certain rights at work. Otherwise, agricultural workers had no rights at work at all. I mean, there was no providing drinking water, there was no toilet facility, there was no insurance for women, nothing. I mean, working hours, shade at the workplace, all these were part of this particular act. So we felt this is something that we could get workers to think that they are not just slaves, uh, to work at any condition. They also had rights as workers at the workplace. So we started to create awareness and demand. In fact, if they demanded work and it was not given, there was a provision that they should be fined and they should be given a particular unemployment allowance. So all these concepts, all these ideas, we were able to bring it to the workers in the agriculture sector. And also, I mean, we used it also in construction workers who were absolutely, again, had no documents as workers. They would work for 5 days, 10 days, 6 months in a particular building, but they were absolutely invisible. So,
May I
so that's like, yeah, sorry, yeah.
No, sorry. I just interrupt you for a second because I'm going to ask again a question which is extremely simple or relatively because the issues are complex for those of us working, living in India, but not for everyone. What's a Dalit?
India's it's a caste system. India, I mean, we breathe caste system. It is so deeply embedded in our psyche, the caste system, and it's been drilled into every Indian, what place they occupy in the social hierarchy. And the four major castes, as you would know, is the Brahmin, who is the priestly caste, the Kshatriya, who is the warrior, and the Vaisya, who is the businessman, and these are the upper caste. And then you have the Shudra at the bottom of the rung, who is actually the artisan and the working people who were within the caste system. There were those who were not within this caste structure, and they were the Dalits. They were kept outside the caste system. They were actually untouchable. They could not enter where these caste Hindus who came within the caste system were living. So they had to live outside the village. Normally in a very kind of marshy area, which is a useless kind of area, which had no facilities. And there are a lot of restrictions imposed on them. They could not access water of the village. They could not walk on the roads. I mean, there were severe punishment, killing, maiming, if they violated all this. So this is the Dalit, which was absolutely kept out of the whole social thing. But they did all the menial, what they considered low, impure kind of work. That is restricted. This is the Dalit. The Dalit would mean the oppressed. This is a term, kind of a political term, which Ambedkar in his movement used it. Gandhi used Harijan, God's people, but Ambedkar gave more of a political thing. It's the oppressed people.
Indeed, and here again, we're not really here to explain such a complex issue, but that was, I think, important for the participant to understand a bit better what we are mentioning, in the sense that we are going to have a point, we are going to address the caste issue again when we'll talk about the garments worker. So in an Ambedkar being, one of the major intellectuals of the 20th century, a contributor, a founder of the Constitution, sense we use the term Dalit, and again, there's a massive literature on that, and it's extremely complex. But that was just important to make a sort of footnote. Now, Sebastian, would you like to move to the idea of collective bargaining and then indeed the garment industry?
Yeah, a little. I think you also asked about the tribal, and in India, the tribal population is about almost 3 to 4%, and they have also been severely discriminated against. They've been deprived of their livelihood, pushed out of the forest. So there is always this. There is a thing of equating Dalits and tribal, but it's not exactly the same. the tribal community has lived in the forest. They were not part of the whole, but they were always excluded. So, but whereas the Dalits were really, I mean, there was a violence against the Dalit community. So this is another part. I mean, currently, why I'm recalling sustainable tribal is because within the garment sector now, a lot of migrant workers are tribal, displaced tribals. So, yeah. So you were saying about the collective bargaining and the garment sector. We actually, in 2000 when the quota system, quota regime was being eased out, before the quota regime was being eased out, there was always a lot of violations. I mean, violation was rampant against garment workers. Factories would just come up, mushroom, and suddenly close down. I mean, as long as they had orders, they would produce, and suddenly one night the factory would close. A lot of workers were left without income, even the wages that they were paid. I mean, they had worked for 1 or 2 months before would not be available to them. So there was this kind of an environment, and none of the trade unions actually attempted to organize. Was it is a big disaster because many workers were not staying with the unions or with the factories. As soon as one factory closed, they could not stay and fight that. They would go to another place where they got employment. So you couldn't organize them. That was the kind of situation. So workers were not organized. So when we felt that we should somehow make an attempt to organize them, and that was in 2003-4, where actually there was a sort of a consolidation process taking place in the garment industry. There were big factories coming up at that time, a lot of investment, huge infrastructure. There were factories with 3,000, 4,000 workers, and on a more long-term, stable kind of production process were taking place. So that is how we came together. But in the first, we also could not, we didn't understand exactly how to deal with this. Workers were getting employment, so they were told there was a movement of trade union where many trade unions were jailed. There was a lot of violence. So this was in the memory, and this was used by the employers to say that they destroyed the factory. They destroyed many factories closed not because of the agitation, but because of the multi-fiber arrangement coming down and quotas changing. That is why factories closed. But employers used that to tell the workers that because unions had come in, we had to close down and they lost it off. So for some time it was very difficult even to engage with workers and talk to them about union. They used to literally run away from us. And so our early organizing was visiting every worker in their homes, talking to them, just documenting the kind of violations that were taking place and the working conditions. And, so this was how we started, and it was only firefighting. Wherever there was some violation, we would rush to that place. Wherever there was closure, we would rush to that place, take up a case, go to the labor department, file some case, some arbitration, and get some justice. Or so at that time the labor department was still a little more responsive. It had not completely, not like today, it had not yet completely withdrawn from its role. At least some arbitration, some kind of thing was taken, and employers also felt a certain amount of responsibility come to the labor department. So that's what we did in the first few years, or first 10 years. We registered our union in 2009, and we felt that we should give it a more formal kind of a structure. And we started to try and organize workers into one union which was outside, because there was so much of hostility against unionization. It was open hostility from the employers and the industry itself. And workers themselves had in mind that union means closure of a factory. So this is how we started, and then we, till 2009, we didn't make any headway. I mean, we were solving, it was like just applying some amount of band-aid and things like here and there, wherever there was violation. And we were quite frustrated in the sense we could not move. We didn't understand the global supply chain. And we didn't even realize that there were so many tiers and so many kinds of the industry had organized itself in different ways. So we were running from we couldn't touch the export industry because there were many workers felt is much better than the totally informal sector kind of organization. And so little by little, we had large meetings where workers would come and speak about what the violations that were taking place. But every time they identified and showed themselves, the next day they would be targeted and humiliated or isolated within the factory. And we would lose them. They would become members in hiding. Most of our members were in hiding. They would never declare themselves as belonging to the union. And the environment was such that, especially in the export garment industry, there were even cameras at the gate to identify any worker speaking to a union organizer. And police and the management, the HR personnel would come and start a fight with anyone, even distributing a pamphlet or talking to the workers. So these are the kind of clashes, and we also became a bit hardened, and it became almost two enemy groups. Everything we did was absolutely no to them, and everything they did was something that we had to fight. So this was the kind of thing that had evolved, and our members didn't increase. It was only those who were dismissed or thrown out who came to the union, and we would fight the case in the labor department. 2015, actually, we started to, in 2013, there was a woman in a big export factory against whom one of these managers had made a very nasty remark about her body size and shape and things like that. And she went on objecting. And after 2-3 days of this harassment, she hit the supervisor hit him, because that particular factory, a very big factory, was known to have policemen inside the factory, sort of policing the workers. Any kind of even asking for some very simple thing on the floor of the house, floor of the factory, policemen would be called, and if it is a boy or young boy, they would be beaten in front of all of them in the factory. And women were also very publicly humiliated. And because of the police presence with the management, nobody dared complain. And these workers in this particular factory went on telling us this is the kind of harassment. And workers in this, the women, young girls who were part of the hostel of this factory, we learned that quite a few of them were sexually abused, sexually harassed, misused by the higher management. We couldn't do anything. And when this incident of this woman who was a strong Dalit leader in her own village slapped this manager, we took it up. And even the labor department told us, don't give a complaint saying that she slapped. But we insisted that should be the complaint. And so in the whole argument that came out is to say why he slapped, the management had to step back saying that he was sexually harassing her. And she was reinstated after 3 months. And then she became a leader in that particular factory and gave us some leeway. And that is the factory now we are having a collective bargaining process. So in 2015, we actually started to look at creating leaders within the factory. And we felt that unless there are women leaders who with some strength to raise issues as an outside union, we were not able to do anything. Similarly, as an international, I mean, there are many organizations at the global level who are campaigning against horrible working conditions. That would not make any impact down here because they would always deny everything and nobody could prove it. Even if you take it to an international organization, nobody would acknowledge it, and the police would investigate it and say nothing happened like this. It was always the blame was always on the union. So if you took it to the international arena or to the press without a base, you headed nowhere.
Right.
So we felt, yeah,
Sorry to interrupt you because this is
yeah,
really
yeah.
important, but just again for our participants who are not particularly familiar with these processes and what you are doing, can we maybe explain why and how it took you so much time? You said that, but can we maybe explain what is collective bargaining and why you had to build up progressively? Would you agree if I said that collective bargaining is a sort of process of negotiation to regulate, work, salaries, working conditions, benefits? It's obviously also supported and were framed legally by the ILO, the International Labour Organization, with a number of conventions, for example, the Right to Organize a Collective Bargaining Convention, or Labor Relation Convention, or the Collective Bargaining Convention. But again, in India, what form does it take so that we understand why you had to build up progressively these network of women and train them?
In India, actually, like I said, of the 455 estimated 500 million workers, uh, 94% are in the informal sector. Never heard of any collective bargaining or never had that opportunity. It was only the formal sector, and within the formal sector, the most unionized were the public sector. And so, in that 6%, maybe only about 25 to 30% were actually unionized. And collective bargaining, as I remember, were only with the very big public sector industries and uh, large private sector industries. So nobody had this consciousness of what that you had even right to come together and bargain for something. So for us, collective bargaining was first of all to make workers aware that they have the right to do so, and to remove the fear of asking and talking to the management. Um, uh, Absolutely, I mean, first generation workers, second generation workers had absolutely no idea. I mean, you would be probably surprised that if you talk to them about the Constitution of India or the ILO or any of these conventions, it was uh, too too distant from their realities. So, to build a collective bargaining process, the first thing was to build our own capacity of you know like you said, negotiating over a long period. You cannot solve issues immediately, or you cannot get upset and run away. So you have to build that staying power, and that is for us was the most important thing. And there again, because of the uh, caste and the patriarchal values that are deeply embedded, somehow I think our trade unions and our work never factored this social aspect of where the women workers came from and what prevented them even from participating in a democratic process of sitting together, deciding, discussing with differences and going forward. So yeah.
Exactly. Well, thank you very much for that, Sebastian, for this clarification. As you said, it seems obvious to many of us because we're lucky we're living in democratic environment, India being a democracy, but with also, as you explained, a number of constraints, including the caste system. So it was important for you to progressively educate these women in particular about their rights. I'm a little bit conscious of time, and I know our participants are going to ask you many questions. So can we maybe move to the current situation, the sort of COVID environment, what happened on the ground, and how now you are working with these women in particular?
Yeah. So actually, in India, just before the COVID situation, there was a lot of attack on the labor rights, labor laws. It's been on since, especially since 2000, 2004. There have been all attempts at sort of diluting labor laws. It intensified in the recent 5, 6 years, where an attempts have been made to dilute labor laws. And it was in this background of laws being codified. We have very robust labor laws, actually. I mean, though it is not being accessed and applied, there are labor laws which are very robust because of our earlier struggle. And it was in this background that the pandemic hit us, where unemployment was huge, probably the highest in the last so many 70 years, unemployment, and prices were rising, wages were so low. So when the pandemic hit, it exposed the total vulnerability of the workers and the lack of responsibility of the state and the absolute uh, lack of transparency and accountability in the global supply chain. We didn't know nothing. I mean, we didn't know what happened, what hit us. Everything went suddenly dark. I mean, lockdown was imposed even without any pre-warning. So a lot of workers got stuck in different places because there was a festival at the time and they had traveled different places. So many of them didn't get back their jobs. Uh, uh, Definitely there was a loss of production, and orders had stopped from the brand. But I think it was also used by industry to downsize workers wherever possible. And a lot of workers who returned to work were denied employment. Um, and Once the lockdown was lifted, they reorganized themselves. And we don't know who cancelled orders, who has not received payment. But every employer has been crying about uh, total loss. And there has not been we could not raise the issue of wages. All the facilities that existed, even facilities of transportation or various other facilities that were there, have all been suspended with the excuse that they have to save money and they have to save the factory from completely closing down, and they will lose their job if these are not done. So workers have been made to accept such terrible working conditions, or most of them were paid half the salary during the lockdown period. Uh, I think some of the big export factories paid only 1 month in April, and many of them paid only half of April's wage. Some paid the full wage and made them work for about 104 hours to compensate the loss of wages. So many workers had to come early morning. Normally, the work used to start about 9, but to compensate, they worked on all Sundays, and they came to the factories at about 8 o'clock or in the morning, which meant that they get up at about 4 or 4:30 in the morning. So yeah, this was how it impacted. Very badly impacted were women with children, because all creches were closed in all factories. Um, Suddenly, and that was on March 14th, even before the lockdown was announced, all creches were closed, and women were told, if you want to come, please put your children away and come. Most of them could not come to work, and they were not paid because they were not even there during the lockdown when the lockdown was announced. Then post the lockdown, all the pregnant women were not taken back because there was this thing that pregnant women are at high risk. So they were all stopped. 5 month olds, 5, 6 months into their pregnancy, and they were stopped, and they were not paid their wages. So all this is in the courts now, challenging it. Um, yeah. So this is the situation due to the COVID,
Mm.
and we have been talking to the management, and they have been telling us that most brands have defaulted on their payment, or they're deferring their payment, or they've been asking for discounts in their payment because they're suffering.
Yeah, that's good, Sebastian. Thank you so much for that. And
Or
we are
stop
aware this is
their orders.
Thank you very much, Sebastian, again for that. This is something we've certainly heard about and, well, we've worked on. The fact that international brands during the lockdown in particular have not paid their, suppliers.
Sorry, Laila, I lost you a bit.
Oh, sorry. I was saying, yes, indeed, Sebastian, this is something we've heard very much here during the lockdown and even today, that international brands have not paid their suppliers, and that has naturally impacted these workers and these women on the ground. Again, being conscious of time, and because I see that we are receiving questions now. Can you tell us in a few words, before I give the floor to our participants, what is the plan now? In a way, and how are you going to help these workers using these techniques that you've developed together?
Right now, I mean, we are in reflecting on our actions and what we do, because we're also learning what is happening. We feel that, one, we have to strengthen the base where workers inside the factory have to talk to the management and try and resolve issues, because definitely there are issues which neither the management is responsible nor the workers are responsible. And so we can find a way talking to each other. And that is something that we place a lot of importance on. And that also will strengthen the workers and remove certain amount of fear that they have about talking about very simple things. Protective measures, the crash, whether they can reorganize it. So this is at the factory level. We're also looking to see how we can come together at the national level, because these large export houses are all over the country, and whenever there is some difficulty of negotiation or talking to the workers, they tend to say that we will move to the next state. So somehow we need to put together a common kind of a group across the country to raise common issues. And we feel that we definitely have to connect to global trade unions, labor rights organizations, because right now, often the brands are quite wanting to keep their image of being respectable, decent, and respecting human rights. I think that is something that in the three levels we want to.
That's good. Yeah. Thank you very much again for that, Sebastian. At the same time, we've seen a list of brands you're working with, because I think we have to stress this idea. You're also working collaboratively and globally, the supply chain being global. Thanks very much again, Sebastian. We've received a number of questions, so I'm going to read the first one from our colleague Tamil, who's working on international human rights law in particular. Thank you for the presentation. That was really informative. Do you think international human rights mechanism, in particular the UN Human Rights Council, has provided sufficient remedy to workers in South Asia? What will be lasting legal and societal consequences of the pandemic on migrant workers in South Asia? So the first point of the question has to do with international human rights mechanism, and in particular the UN. Well, I think that's going to be relatively simple to answer. And the second one has to do with the lasting legal and societal consequences of the pandemic on migrant workers, in particular in South Asia.
What's the second part, Leila?
The second part has to do with the long-lasting legal and societal consequences of the pandemic on migrant workers in Asia.
I don't know whether I'm competent to answer the question, because my experience has been very limited. International, I definitely right now, the impunity with which violations are happening, I don't know how much impact international law has on local situations. Because there is we feel there's a lot of collusion of the state which is now becoming more and more openly with the industry, sort of turning a blind eye on violations. So, in the absence of anything that we could document and record properly, international law has very little impact on the ground.
Yeah, well, I think as international lawyers, we know very well that, if not incorporated into domestic law through different procedures, the impact is relatively limited. You're right, and that's something we have observed in the businesses and human rights movement for those of us working on these issues for years now, despite the progresses at the level of the UN, despite the lobbying, the guidelines. The reality on the ground has not necessarily changed positively, and that's one of the reasons I started my introductory remark with, all these who makes your clothes and all the sort of textile revolution. All that is very nice, but when you work on the ground, you see little progresses actually, which something can be a bit demoralizing, but at the same time, you need to continue the fight. Sebastian, yeah.
India has so far not ratified the Convention 87 or the Convention 98. So it shows, that we are fighting, we are struggling against a large rock. So, so without ensuring freedom of association, um, that is so low, so minimal, the unionization process. So I think that is the most important thing that we have to strengthen.
Yeah, the freedom of association, certainly. Can you maybe tell us about, some sort of, because we don't want to conclude in a very dark sort of note, can you tell us about some sort of success stories around unionization and these women we've met sometimes who have become union leaders at the factory level?
Yeah. Thanks for reminding me of that, because that is what gives us hope. In the past 3 to 4 years, we have, with this new strategy of building worker leaders, we have managed to create at least 50 such women leaders in Bangalore, in about 4 factories. And we have formed them into a executive committee where they meet regularly, once a month or once in 3 months, and they decide all the issues either within the factory or within an area where there are several factories. So we have these two kind of discussions that are happening, and in these two large factories, we raised very simple demands of drinking water, which was the response was violence against all the leaders, which got exposed at the international level. Probably you could look at the WRC report, Worker Rights Consortium report on that in 2018. It was really a violent, murderous attack on very innocent workers who were just strong enough to raise the issue of drinking water, which was very, very terrible. And that helped. But like you said, because we held on to our goal of wanting to bargain, wanting to sit and talk to them, we convinced ourselves and the worker leaders that we should not retaliate back. And so we held on to this thing of wanting to negotiate. When we said we're not interested in going ahead and fighting with you. And slowly we were able to gain a certain amount of confidence among the workers, as well as the management felt, okay, we could try this out. And so in the past 2 years, we have been sitting and talking to them, and quite a bit of working conditions have been improved. And there are decisions that are taken by the management, which is the largest export industry in India, to listen to the workers and change certain working conditions. Of course, it's not been very major, not in the wage. We've not been able to touch the wage at all. But respect for women at workplace has definitely improved. We have identified the kind of abuses workers have. They had, in fact, had a very transparent election process for the workers' committee, which has never happened in the industry. It's always been by nomination. The workers' committee or the factory committees, which are five committees of grievances and other things. For the first time in this industry, it was held, giving the opportunity of all workers to participate, and they were elected in a very transparent manner. And in another place where where a woman was openly in the floor of the house, floor of the factory was chased, her clothes were ripped up by the general manager and his henchmen. We were able to, the workers came onto the street, 500 of them, and held on saying that we don't want anything else but that he should be removed. Over there also we were able to build a representative group, and now they've started to, the past 1 year, they've been negotiating on respect at workplace. So this is something we have advanced because brands wages, I mean, we can't raise wages, but on the question of for women is a very, very highly sensitive issue, and women themselves and their families feel that the women should be respected. So this is some strong thing that we are working on now.
Right.
Yeah, we're trying to build small structures where it can, be sustained.
Yeah, yeah, of course, Sebastian. And here again, your experience as someone who's working on the ground for so many years is so important, because for those of us who are academics working on global trends, working at the macro level, sometimes it's not so easy to understand that very small details make a difference. Having the right to go to the toilets, for instance, for women, having the right to take breaks seems so basic, and very often these rights are denied to women workers. Along the same line, we have another question from Tamil, and Tamil, thank you very much for this question. He says that as a 12 stands for third world approaches to international law. So for people who belong to this group, and a few of us are belonging to this group, third world approaches to international law, we put a lot of emphasis on building international law from the below. What could the visions and the role of stakeholders based on your work be to help building international and labor law in particular from the below? Do you see this sort of concept of a new form of international built up from the below? Because this is exactly what we were discussing, actually, small steps.
Yeah, we are a long way off, but I think that's the most thing that we all desire. I mean, the law cannot be imposed from top, especially like we said in India, with the kind of cultural organize your thinking, and if women can propose, especially, I mean, our trade unions have been very male, very patriarchal. They've never thought or incorporated many of these issues. But if this can come from below and can influence the international law, it will be really a new social order.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much, Sebastian. I'm afraid we have to bring this really fascinating discussion to a close, but I'd like to warmly thank you and your team, as well as all the participants coming again from Bangladesh, India, Ecuador, China, UK, maybe Greece as well, for their great work and support. And of course, I'd like to thank my team as well, Gloria, and Ireland. Of course, Tamil, you're from Ireland. And I'd like to thank my team in particular, Gloria, her, Claudia, and Olga for supporting us. And of course, Sebastian is reachable. If you have more questions, feel free to send me messages and I'll send them to Sebastian. There is much more work on this topic to be done, and we are working on this topic with a number of people. So certainly a number of new seminars are in the making. Thank you so much, Sebastian, for your time, knowing that the situation in Bangalore is not easy, and a number of your team and your colleagues have suffered very directly from the COVID-19. So I'm really very grateful for your participation.
Thank you, Laila. We also, I mean, we have social media handle, Twitter and things like that. I'm sure someone can follow that. I think it's been displayed, the union and what we do steadily. So I request you all to also, whoever is interested, to follow and respond over there. our team, there's a big team which is working on it. I'm just one piece of it. Thanks a lot for giving me this opportunity. Hope we continue to work together.
Absolutely. And everyone, you know already, but all our webinars are recorded. So you'll see Sebastian on the website of the University of Portsmouth pretty soon if you want to hear again this discussion or get more information. So in about a few days, I'm sure you can see this webinar on our website. Thank you so much again, everyone. And I shall see you next week for another webinar on a very interesting topic, actually women in the music industry. See you very soon, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.